Hello, and a very good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our fourth session of November. We've had a really busy month, and some great speakers and some fun as well. As always, hope everybody is doing well. We've only got a further 2 more sessions to go of this year. Then we're going to be back in week 2 of the new year. As I keep saying, the feedback from all of you on our speakers and topics is still continuing to be really positive. But as always, if you've got any feedback for us, any ideas for speakers, future topics, or even volunteers to be a speaker, please do reach out to us. So as per all of our previous events, everybody is on mute currently. You cannot share your screen. What I would suggest for the best viewer experience, certainly to start with, is to put yourself into speaker view. This can be found on the top right where it says view, and just click on speaker. Today's session is going to be pretty interactive, and Rob is going to be asking you to make some comments in the chat window. For those of you that are new to Zoom, and I can't think that there's that many of us that are new, this can be found at the very bottom. It's in between polls and share screen. Click onto that, that will open the chat window. There's also going to be some natural breaks in between the topics today. At these points, we will do a very short Q&A with a longer Q&A towards the end. As we've done the last week and the week before, for those of you that don't immediately need to disappear, we will be staying on for about 15-20 minutes just to do some general networking. Approximate time for today is around about 45 minutes for Rob's presentation, and a further 15 to 20 minutes for a Q&A. Timings wise, this really depends on your questions and your interactions. As you already know, the event is being recorded. And the video with a copy of the handouts will be available on the social media links and the CIPD mailer, which I will share with you towards the end of this presentation. Incidentally, Rob's handout, I have saved it down into a Dropbox. I will drop that link into the chat window as we go along. I may do it a few times, actually. Before we get going, quick sound and visual check. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. It's good to see you. We know that everything is working. So, as we've done more often than not of late, our speakers can do and have done a much better job of introducing themselves than I could possibly do. So, on that note, Rob, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, what I'm actually going to do, Lee, is I'm going to go straight into something. Just want to do a quick question for the guys to get them going in the chat before I kind of do the formal introduction. But first of all, thank you for yourself, Lee, and Sarah and Donna for inviting me along today. Really looking forward to getting going with what L&D value really means. It's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I've been passionate about for a very long time now, because I think that it's something that we get the name as order takers quite a lot. And what I'm looking to do is help people really move away from that title and to becoming real difference and real wave makers within the organisations that they work with. So what I want to do is, if you just go into the chat panels, I just want to do a quick question. It's a quick multiple choice. So all in the comments you need to do is just an A, B, C or D. In the current climate, in the current COVID climate, who do you think is to blame for the country's performance through this crisis and the financial problems that will follow? Do you think it's the people who train and coach our nurses and doctors? Do you think it's the frontline nurses and doctors themselves? Do you think it's the government? Do you think it's the NHS managers and leaders? So just A's, B's, C's and D's. Whatever you think. Now, I'm not getting the chat results just at the moment, Lee. Can you see what sort of things are coming through there?
No, I can indeed, Rob. It's actually been interesting because one of the ones that I thought of straight away was none of the above apply. And we've had quite a few people that have said that. An awful lot of C's and a few C and a D, predominantly C or none of the above.
Cool, excellent. So building on that, just another one, exactly the same, just put A, B, C or D again. And the next question is, this is linking to kind of in a football world, and you don't need to be a football fan to kind of get this one. From experience, who is likely to be let go as a result of poor performance and or results on the football pitch? Is it A, the chairman, the owner, B, the manager, C, the coaching staff, D, the football players themselves?
There you go. Predominantly B, with a few D's in there as well. A couple of C's in there. B and C predominantly. In fact, everybody is answering B.
B. Okay, yep, and makes complete sense. It normally is that the manager that we see get the chop. So I'm just going to pull away from that for a second. I'm going to come back to it later on. So just kind of remember what we looked at there. So predominantly, I think the trend was where we were looking at the government in the NHS question, and we were looking at the managers in the football question.
Seems to be correct, yes.
Thank you, Lee. So quick introduction to myself then. So I'm Rob Morse Consulting. I've been in L&D over 20 years now, predominantly in organisations like the NHS, Talk and Sky, in a variety of roles that span everything from delivery, design, consultancy, business partnering and senior leadership. Two key things for me over those 20 years came as epiphanies, I like to say. One was the role of leadership itself. When I became a leader for the first time in L&D, it was the most stressful thing I've ever been through. Just simply because the support isn't there normally for those first time leaders. The second epiphany was linked into that was the role of coaching. I guess the biggest part of that was that I thought I was coaching and I thought I was receiving coaching. And it turned out I was getting neither of the above. What we were actually doing was performance meetings and task-driven one-to-ones. And from there, it's kind of changed the way I look at things. Now, in a summary, I look back at those 20 years now, and one little phrase comes to mind, and it's R&R. So again, in the chat panel, what do you think I mean by R&R? And Lee, if you could just, I think PowerPoint's taken over my my setup, so if you can just tell me what the comments are saying for me.
Okay, roles and responsibilities.
Roles and responsibilities.
Okay, results and return.
Results and return.
Just give the people a few more moments to write anything else that comes through. Rest and relaxation, which is kind of where I was going with it. Rest and recuperation.
Yeah. That's interesting when you put things like this up, just that so many people think different things of just a very simple phrase, but you're absolutely right. This is what it's for.
Reflect and respond.
Yeah.
Resources and results.
So interestingly, and again, you know, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong on these things because R&R could mean any of the above, and it does mean all of the above. For me, the R&R that I reflected on for those 20 years plus is coming up at the bottom of the screen there now. Restructure and redundancy. Now, that pattern there I've drawn up is a quick, very quick snapshot of my just over 20 years in the industry. 10 restructures, 5 of which I remained where I was, went on to different roles or similar roles, and 5 times redundancies as normally quite large scale redundancies within the L&D and people world. And upon the last one, and upon setting up my own consultancy, it's something that I really reflected hard of in 2 ways. One, why does this keep happening? And I don't think it's a current phenomenon, and I don't think it's a phenomenon just to myself. And I guess, you know, more importantly, not only does this, why does it keep happening, but why do I keep bothering to stay in the industry when this keeps happening? And it's something that I really wanted to think really long and hard about. And I think by the end of today, what I want to do is getting you thinking about this as well. One of my favourite films is Shawshank Redemption, and you're going to see this pop up a couple of times today. And I love the fact that the 2 key characters in the film, Red and Andy, they both had a key quote about hope. Red was very much more institutionalized. He'd been in prison, if you've not seen the film, for far longer than Andy. And his take was, hope is a dangerous thing and hope can drive a man insane. Whereas Andy's was very much more positive, much more kind of fulfillment driven, that hope is a good thing and maybe the best of things and no good thing ever dies. And it drove him on to go through the hard times because he saw a brighter future. And I think, you know, that the L&D professionals and teams that I've worked with and in very much fall within one of those two categories. Ones that kind of go, we want to work a different way, but we can't. We know we can't, so we'll just accept what we do. And those that actually want to really push hard through the, sometimes wading through treacle to try and make a difference and work in a different way. So as we go through this, I want you to start thinking about yourself there and your teams of which one of those you might start falling into. Going back to my reflections there, it dawned on me that we're saying currently there's never been a more important time, or people have never been more important in our businesses as they are right now. And I get the sentiment behind that. I disagree with it to some extent, because I just think that people have always been really important to businesses. We've just chosen to prioritize that at the minute because of the current climate. But it's certainly not just a recent phenomenon. If we look at things like the ongoing stuff over the last decade or so around things like mental well-being and mental health, to things like attraction, pensions, physical healthcare, just all in benefits packages to attract and keep and maintain those great people. Yet at the same time, based on my story, it also appears to me that the importance of people functions hasn't mirrored that growth. They are, or do tend to be, the first to go. And the comments I tend to hear from L&D functions tends to be, they're letting us go because they don't understand training. Who's going to do what we do now? We do so much and we're so busy. How can they justify getting rid of a training function? They need us. We have such a big backlog of work. What we really need is more people and more money to do it. Yet the people who obviously are making that decision don't see that. And so it kind of dawned on me that there's no smoke without fire. Do they have a point? If those senior leaders that are making these restructured decisions, if they don't see our value as people professionals, it's either not visible or it doesn't exist. And if it's not visible, it might as well not exist. All of those reasons that I talked about just before around the objections to being let go, they're all very task focused rather than values driven. And my take on, again, my experiences was that we've become very much preoccupied with what we do rather than why we actually do it. And a lovely little story that I won't go into depth in, that you can look it up yourselves, is that around the janitor in NASA in the early 60s who was the benefit of meeting with the President Kennedy at the time as he announced the mission to the moon over the next decade. And when asked the janitor what his job was, the janitor didn't say, I clean the toilets, I clean the work surfaces, I get in before everyone else. He gave a very short, sharp, clear answer. And his answer was, my job is to help us get a man on the moon. Now, can we say as L&D professionals and teams what our job is? That's succinctly that links directly to that end mission. And ask yourselves this. If you had to cut costs in your business, would you get rid of a person or a team that added clear and obvious value to the end performance and results? And the answer is probably no. So why do we still get rid of these teams? Well, in my reflections, this is what I came up with. Now, I want to make two things clear at this point. First of all, I don't think this is because L&D professionals get up in the morning and choose to be deliberately ineffective. Quite the opposite. We're really skilled, we're really talented, and we're really passionate about what we do and how we want to do it. Secondly, I'm also not preaching from a holier than thou pedestal position. These traps that I'm about to go through, I've fallen into most, if not all of these, and still occasionally do. They're very tempting for a number of reasons. Normally, because of urgency, time pressures, and cost pressures. What are the traps that we tend to fall into that lead us to this end point? First of all, training. Might seem an odd one because it's one of the key things we do. But you may have noticed over the years, we've ceased to call ourselves training professionals and training teams on the large and moved towards learning and L&D, learning and development. But training is still a big part of what we do. And taking orders for the training that people want us to deliver, and then trying by some sort of osmosis to give the skills to people who need it so they can then go away and they have been trained. They are converted, they can now do what we've shown them. And it normally leads to one of my most feared phrases in the world of L&D, which is a few months later, can we have some retraining? And if we get to that point, we're retraining because training on its own does not work. The second one is results. I mentioned before around the janitor in NASA. How do we measure what we do? How do we monitor and measure our impact? I think we've got over the last 20 years, so obsessed with trying to measure and define the ROI that training teams give. We've probably, in some desperation sometimes, started to measure the wrong things. How many people have we trained? How many courses have we got on the learning management system, the LMS? How many e-learnings have been completed this month? All that sort of thing. Rather than, hang on a minute, how have we actually influenced things like customer satisfaction, NPS, profit, all of those actual key business metrics and missions? Analysis. And two forms of this, data analysis and learning needs analysis. Both are critical. But I think in the way that we've done it, we tend to look at our own data and we do learning needs analysis based on our own catalogue of options. The data we need to start asking for and drilling down into is our stakeholder data and our customer and client data to find out where their gaps are, not where our gaps are, and what the things we can deliver on the back of it. We also need to start thinking about the people we ask of these learning needs analysis. Trust is a big thing for me. Trust in a culture is enormous. And the feeling of vulnerability to be able to tell people I need help. If you work in an organization where leaders maybe don't feel comfortable admitting a lack of skills in certain areas, are they going to fill that learning needs analysis out correctly and tell you what it is they can't actually do? So building that is really important. Prioritization, and I jokingly put underneath it there something a colleague of mine in a previous place came up with, which was that the my dad is bigger than your dad matrix, which it tends to kind of come to that we end up working on the things that someone has shouted louder and wants, and it can be quite stressful. What do we prioritize and how do we prioritize it and what should we prioritize? And it tends to be that we'll do that based on what our manager tells us or what the head of L&D is under pressure to deliver. And the last one is symptoms. We tend to get the requests, we get those orders, and those orders are normally based around what people are seeing in front of them. And those symptoms could be symptomatic of a much bigger thing. And when we get into how we actually start doing this, we'll talk about the comparison between L&D and a doctor and how we should start actually rooting down into that more rather than just providing training on the symptom. Because if we do that, that's where the retraining then comes back in again. Linking into that, just to keep my little Shawshank Redemption theme going, there's this lovely little quote again. I love that Red said. He'd been in the prison for decades. I think in the end it was about 40, 50 years. And he said, these walls are funny. First you hate them, then you get used to them. Enough time passes, you get so you depend on them. And that's institutionalized. Now I was staring at this quote and I replaced one word. These learning management systems are funny. First you hate them, then you get used to them, and enough time passes, you get to depend on them, and that's institutionalized. Again, quick show of hands, just a yes or a no. How many L&D teams, whether it's yours or those that you've seen, spend so much of their time managing out-of-date content or managing systems that have out-of-date content to try and clean it, that they just don't have the time to do anything else more creative and innovative. You know, what's coming through in there, Lee? Are we getting people saying that they see that?
One person has responded yes. I can't see a number of people in terms of show of hands, so if we could please go into the chat box, please, if people are finding this.
And again, you can start replacing LMS. You mean it could be e-learnings you could put in there. It could be training sessions. If we really just go and put ourselves into the one bracket. I don't know if you guys follow a gentleman called David James on social media. He's a really good L&D contact to follow on there. He talked about we have become the admin for the system that we actually brought in to do the admin for us, which is bonkers when you actually sit and think about it for a second. So what all this actually boils down to for me is performance. So very quickly in the chat panel, could you just put a very short sentence as to how you define performance in your organization, and how you define it, how it's measured? How do you know someone has performed in your organization? I'll just give 30 seconds or so for people to start putting some of that down. And Lee, again, if you could just kind of keep me abreast of what's going on there.
Absolutely no problem at all.
How do you define performance or measure it? How do you know someone has performed?
The first one that's come back, thank you, Jeff, impact and influence. The second one that's come back is research output. Thank you, Anali. Donna, meeting the goals and objectives of the organisation.
Yep.
Sean, thank you. We tend to focus, so this is kind of coming in thick and fast now. We tend to focus on value add delivery. Alison, thank you. Delivering against the needs of our customers. Yep. Vicky, customer satisfaction is our key measure. Yep. Sam, output and delivery. Liz, successful sprints delivered on time. Adam, outcomes driven against goal and objectives. Tara, feedback from our customers, as in managers. Client feedback, thank you, Laura. And Maxine, value add to clients.
Cool. And again, what I would look there is there's a trend in there. So it's good that some are looking at the customer there. That's crucial. That's fantastic that we're looking at that. Quite a few of those are what I would call results driven. The outputs, the goals, the delivery. We've performed if we've said we're going to achieve the things we said we wanted to achieve. I actually define performance slightly differently. It's doing the things you need to do to get the results that you want. And I think this is a very key nuance in there, that quite often in organizations, we actually think of performance and results as being the same thing. Whereas I separate them out slightly and say, look at the results you want and decide the type of performance you think you need to go and get them. But, and this is a big but, this is an interesting question, which again is a yes or no in the chat panel if you could. In terms of performance, is it possible to perform and not get the results? Just a yes or no in the chat panel, please. Is it possible to perform and not get the results?
Everybody's coming back through. Yes, 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 yes.
Perfect. Great. It absolutely is. But I think the trip up point, the trap that we often fall into as L&D, as HR, as business motivated people, where the end point is to make the profit and the time pressures that we talked about earlier on, we often go, someone hasn't performed if that result isn't in place. Think of the kind of the typical kind of PDP moments and the PIP programs of results that have not been met. Automatically means you've not performed. And an interesting little example that I give there is that, and this is a good example to really go to your stakeholders and maybe trying to influence this mode of thinking, is, again, this is a quick football analogy. This is the top 6 performances of top flight teams ever in the top flight leagues in England. The top 6 performances ever. And the one I want you to draw your attention to is the 5th one. Liverpool are arguably the most successful team in England, and that's their 3rd best season ever, and they finished 2nd. There is no doubt that they performed that year, but they didn't get the result they were after. Now, interestingly, and reverse that question with a quick yes or no in the chat panel again, can you get the result without performing? Can you get the result without performing? What are we getting there, Lee?
We've had a no, we've had a yes, sometimes, a yes, yes.
Absolutely, we can. Depends, yeah. I think it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more cautious in some of the answers there. That it's not as black and white. But I think it absolutely is as black and white. Yes, you can. I mean, as a keen golfer back in the day, I know that sometimes it went in the hole, even if I hit a really bad shot, just not the way I intended it to. And these things do happen. And again, just to carry on, as a consistent example, Liverpool there had one of the most appalling teams they've had in history in 2005. They actually, if you compare it to the top there, they actually finished 5th in their league, one of their worst ever performances in the English top flight division. But they won the Champions League despite being a pretty damn awful team. They didn't perform. They were very lucky all the way through that competition, and they won it. They got the result despite not performing well. Now, I want to ask yourselves a question as an L&D team, and make a note of this yourself. As an L&D team, what is the advice that you give the stakeholders that you work with? Which of these would you prefer to be? Would you prefer to be a team that always performs but doesn't necessarily always get the result? Or would you prefer to be a team that got the result but rarely performed? And as we start going into the next few slides, start really thinking about which one of those gives you the passion to carry on? Which one of those gives you the energy to get out of bed in the morning and really go at it? Are there things that get in the way of this type of work in your organizations? So does the pressure of the result, the target, the bonus actually affect the way that you want to monitor and measure your own performance? Really start thinking about those two things as separate.
As Sarah said here, going back to can you get the result without performing? You might get the result once, possibly based on luck, but unlikely to be consistent, scalable, or unsustainable. And the answers that are coming in is performance, then result, performance, always perform, but don't necessarily get the result. Performance, however, the business wouldn't necessarily see it like that. Performance, but I'm not liking the choices.
I think we actually, as an L&D team, we fall into this trap quite a lot, that we scale ourselves up in terms of number of designers, number of delivery trainers, all this sort of stuff to achieve certain targets that maybe aren't in the actual mode of working that we truly believe in. And then that's why when we actually shift the way we're trying to do things, we suddenly become expendable. So I want to come back to the questions I launched right at the very start of this, where we selected the football manager would be the one that would go, and the government was largely the choice that we made when we said these people are to blame for how we find ourselves. And interestingly, the two that didn't really get much of a vote at all were the coaches and trainers of football teams, and the education facilities, the universities that train new nurses and support them, and everyone in the NHS to do their job. And it's interesting because my observation on this is that the reason they don't get removed, when so often L&D teams do get removed, is that their performance is aligned very directly with the mission and contributes directly to the results of the organizations that they're in. Without those trainers and coaches, it's very, very obvious that performance levels and results would drop. And also, it's not just a one-hit wonder. You don't get the football trainers and coaches training someone at the start of the season and saying, there you go, you're now good for the season, off you pop. They are coaching and training every day, between matches, before matches, at half time. They're looking at the data during the matches to be able to play that back to players in those breaks, constantly working to really push the performance directly where it matters, not just in measuring their own effectiveness. And I think that's something we really need to do as L&D teams. So what I've done is I've actually created this 6-step playbook. Now, there's lots more of this information that we can cover at another time. It's far too much to look at on this particular webinar. But I have done a brief overview of how you can start thinking in this way. But very succinctly, to start working and thinking in this way and start adding real value as an L&D team in our organizations, we need to start thinking in the way that we've been talking about. And mindset first. So how do you want to work? What's your fulfillment? How do you see L&D? Why did you get into this in the first place? When you do that, you can actually then start to motivate and engage others in your team and beyond to do the same and want to do the same. You can then go to your stakeholders more consistently and start consulting with them around the real problems rather than just the requests that come in. And with those, you can have conversations around stakeholders, both in your team and external to that, about where real accountability and responsibility lie. And that's a key one. That's a workshop in itself sometimes, to actually talk about what the difference is between responsibility and accountability for certain things that we do. Then we can go forward uniformly and design better learning interventions. And by that, I don't mean the physical design of programs or of e-learning modules. I mean, being able to experiment and innovate and be able to throw something away if it's not working, but be able to be brave enough and have the trust in the organization to try something. And then after that, be able to manage those priorities effectively, so we're always working on the right things in alignment with the business. What I've done for today for you guys, and it's on the handout as well, is I've broken this down into a very quick script sheet for you. And at the end of this session, I'm going to ask you to choose one of these for yourself. Write it down in your notes, or if you've got the handout and you've printed it, that's fine, that you think would add big value to you immediately if you started working like this. First one, move away from training consultancy towards performance consultancy. Charles Jennings, who co-founded the 70-20-10 Institute, once said that if you ask a training consultant for training, guess what you get? You get training. Performance consultancy is really getting in the nooks and crannies of that. A great example of this would be, if you think about some of the companies I've worked for, like Sky, a massive emphasis on systems was placed in terms of how the customer interfaces with the organization. It needs to be slick, it needs to be simple, it needs to be as few clicks and screens as possible for them to be able to buy the things that they want from us. But then the people on the first line, when they're actually selling on a call, they have to go between 3 or 4 systems, if you're lucky, to sell those same things. And not very nice user interfaces, kind of bog standard core programmed pieces of software. And then they have a help system that actually guides them through the process to go between those different ones. And we say, hang on a minute, the reason we don't do that for our customers is that they wouldn't be engaged. They'd probably think it was a poor experience. They'd probably drop out of the journey, and they'd probably not bother carrying on with it, and they'd leave. But then we shout at our agents and our first line staff when they do exactly the same thing. They're not engaged, they're not followed this process, and they find it difficult. Maybe the reason people aren't doing what we're asking them to do is because the systems are poor or complex. Maybe leaders aren't coaching, don't have the time to coach. The learning that they've got isn't embedded, those types of things. So really drilling down into that. That's when we can start focusing less on symptoms and more on the actual problems that they're pointing towards. Although it's not just about problems, the real challenges and opportunities that lie there to help the business achieve what they're really after, rather than just solve the symptoms of bigger problems. Stop thinking about your big long list. And if you're anything like the teams I've worked with in the time, there's a big backlog of requests that are coming in that we need to do, as well as our own work that we're trying to do. Stop thinking about this in terms of your priorities. Lots of them aren't your priorities. They're the company's priorities. When I was working at TalkTalk, what I did was I brought together the senior members of staff, the heads of all the different departments. And I had just simply displayed the things that we had got as requests that we were working on. And you'd be surprised just how many times what happens there is that they didn't know what was being requested, often from each other or their own teams. And they put a pen through quite a lot of it, instantly reducing half the workload. But more importantly, by the end of those conversations, there is a uniform agreement of what the priority and what we should be working on is. Training impact then moves towards business impact, and the scramble to try and find out what the return on investment of learning and development is moves away, and it's more about how we're contributing to those key metrics that actually do matter. So when some of the people on the workshop in the chat panel earlier were talking about customer satisfaction, fantastic, because that's what customers care about and that's what the business is measured on. This is a key one for me, something that I've massively fallen into. We've moved away from training and started calling it learning culture. Learning's like breathing. It's always happening whether we like it or not. And it can be breathing something bad in, or we can be breathing good things in. It's always happening. You already have a learning culture. If people have bad habits, it's because they learnt those bad habits. What we don't have is a coaching culture. A coaching culture actually guides that learning in the directions we need it to go and unleashes the potential of the people to achieve it. By doing that, we actually start moving away from courses being the injection we give to people that then means they can do something, which is obviously preposterous, and moving towards the resources they need at the time that they need them. Now, this could be content that we provide, it could be support from us as coaches, it could be support from their managers. Which is really interesting when you look at it, that we should actually move away from supporting managers by helping their staff directly. And we need to focus more on enabling leaders to support their own staff. They're with them every day. And we can do that quite effectively. And finally, it's flipping the way that we work as a general. Instead of looking at the skill set first, let's coach leaders, let's teach leaders how to coach, and then say to them, here's a bunch of tools to help you do that, and then send them back into the organization that doesn't actually have the time or inclination to work in that way. Let's focus on the mindset first. Why is coaching important? How can it work? Let's really work with stakeholders to think in a different way and then talk about the tool sets that need to be in place. And after that, and only then, the skill set up skills that need to be in place to help people do it. Now, I just want to focus on two little parts before we go to a Q&A. Start thinking this way, and it's a big long process, by the way, hence the big Andy Dufresne reference in Shawshank. It takes a long time to break out of this. The myself piece is the first part of my medals playbook. Now, the first part is massive. It's thinking a different way, focusing on you and your strengths and your beliefs and your energy, focusing on being able to respond rather than react to situations and really push that consistently. But what I want to just ask you today is the bottom part about your energy, your legacy, and the fulfillment that you have. And somewhat cheesily, the reason I've chosen that is, we're 1 month exactly away from Christmas Day. So what better way to start than with health? So we've got energy, legacy, and fulfillment. Tie that into our Shawshank stream again. It comes down to a simple choice, Andy said, in his mindset. Get busy living or get busy dying. Do we want to really make a change in the way that learning and development adds value to an organization so it becomes the first name on the team sheet rather than the first head on the chopping block? Or are we happy carrying on as we are and going through these cyclical restructures and redundancies and changes in the way that we work? So the questions for you to just jot down for yourself or to actually start thinking about. Energy. What is it you do in your role in your department that gives you energy? What are the things that you do that get you out of bed in the morning to go and do it? And what are the things that actually make you want to stay in bed and not do it? In terms of legacy, when you retire, what do you want that legacy to be? What do you want to look back on and say you've achieved and that people said about you in terms of your L&D vision, your impact, and the value you brought to the business results? How does that make you feel? And what does it look and sound like in your mind? I link that then to your fulfillment. Why did you get into the career that you're in right now? Can you honestly say that you're fulfilling that legacy? You're achieving the things, the reasons why you got into it. And very simply, you don't have to share these. By all means, you can put it in the chat panel if you want, but this is more for yourselves. Just score 1 to 10 for each of those. In your current ways of working, are you fulfilling your legacy? Are you gaining fulfillment? And are you getting energy from the ways in which you currently work? Just 1, you're not. 10, you absolutely are. And when you've jotted down a little score for yourself there, think about that previous crib sheet I talked about, where we were looking at symptoms to problems and learning culture to coaching culture. And think to yourself, which of those could you start doing straight away to push yourself up in that score? For each of them. Which of them would give you more energy if you work that way? Which would you love to have as a legacy when you leave your current place or when you retire or whatever that might look like? What would give you much more fulfillment in the way that you work if you were to do that? And I've mentioned a few times that this all boils down to trust. You have to trust yourself in the face of the adversity that you're going to come up with. Status quo will kick back in and the pressures will come back to try and push you away. Trust yourself. You need to trust others in enabling them to work and think in this way. And a simple little exercise for you to think about this is think about trust in terms of being predictable and vulnerable. It's dead easy to do the predictable trust stuff. I trust that someone will bring me a coffee if I've asked them to bring me a coffee or they've offered to bring me a coffee. Brilliant. There's no real vulnerability in that. But to put your hand up and go, I'm struggling here. Can you help me? Even looking down towards your team and go, can you help me? I'm in this with you. Is vulnerable. And a nice little simple way to do this after today is to think about vision and values. Again, on your piece of paper next to you on your notepad, can you write down what the vision for your organization is? Can you write down the values that organization says are crucial for that? And what are the behaviors that the organization says will tell us that that vision is in place? Now, if you haven't got any of those in the organization, there's a starting point for today. If you can't remember those, or the people that you go away, your stakeholders, couldn't answer those. I mean, commonly when I've asked this, I've had senior managers scrambling on the internet to try and find what the values are very quickly. So again, that's something to focus on. But this isn't just a corporate thing. You've got to be vulnerable and to lead in this way as well. What's your vision for your team? What's your L&D vision? about the way you should work and make a difference in the organization? What are the values that are required to meet that vision? And how can your team help you build that so they own it? They're not just told it, they own it. What are the behaviors based on some of the stuff maybe we've been talking about today that will be true in your team if that vision is true and if those values have been in play? And a great question sometimes about those corporate ones is, if you would change any of those values that are on the wall in the meeting rooms that you work in or that we used to work in, would you change any of them? Co-creation, really asking people about what they believe in these things is crucial. So in summary, it's time to break out. It's time to start changing the way that L&D is perceived and to add the value in the way that we've never done before. So what's your plan? What I'd love you to do is write down, and you can do it in the chat panel or you can do it on the notepad or both, is commit to one thing from today. It could be one thing we've said. It could be one thing from the crib sheet that I mentioned earlier on. It could be something that's just come to your mind as we've gone through this. One thing that you're going to do differently from today that you think will push your energy up, push the fulfillment, and increase L&D value in your organization that you can do immediately from today and can drive within your teams. If anyone wants to share that in the chat panel, fantastic. Otherwise, that is yours to own, and please commit to it and do it. On that, thank you for listening. I hope that's been really useful for you, and in return has added value in this direction also. Lee, if I can hand back to you just to kind of go, is there anything coming through in the chat panel about any of those goals? Or
no, there is. No, there is indeed. In fact, there's been so Sarah's put a question in it, and I think it actually related back to, and it's a really interesting one that I'm curious about as well. Supporting managers versus enabling leaders is a really interesting discussion. Is there a distinct role called manager anymore? Sarah doesn't have an answer. Just really curious to what others think about.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one. It certainly is an interesting one, because I think that, well, in terms of my leadership model, which I call the C12 leadership framework, leadership and management are tools within the overall kit. It's about leadership, it's about management, and it's about guiding. So the job title for me, it's largely irrelevant in some ways, because I think anyone can be a leader. And if you tag someone with only one of those, and I have seen people employed as managers, as guides, and as leaders, they tend to only play in the one place. You know, management gets a bad rep. I think if all you do is manage results and manage performance and manage people, it becomes tiring. But even if you lead the way that we're talking about, and you guide with coaching, conversations, and trust, you do still have to manage towards results occasionally.
Excellent, thank you for that. Sarah's also put, in terms of what she is going to take away, is define and articulate my legacy from the ELF activity. Jeff has commented, have the L&D team watch this session. And then another note with managers equal activity. And Sam has written, look more closely at energy, legacy, fulfillment.
So they think it does start and end with yourself. It certainly did for me. I mean, I got to a position where in my last redundancy, I actually said, I was about to say I asked myself this question, but as a bit of a cheat, it was a senior stakeholder of mine from a previous company that asked me directly, can you achieve what you want to achieve in the environment that you're in with the people that are within it and their mindset? Or do you need to do it a different way? And this is where I go back to that hope screen right at the very start of the presentation. I want to achieve this. And my decision was, I want to do this in a different way. This is the way I think I can have the better impact in terms of my legacy. What gives me the energy, coming onto this sort of stuff and sharing this message gives me immense energy to do it. It really does. So hopefully that comes through. But yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So thank you for that.
Does anybody else have any questions? If anyone would like to come off of mute to ask a question, then as long as everybody doesn't do it all at once, then we're more than happy to take a couple of questions from the floor. Don't be shy. Feel free if anybody wants to come up or type any more questions into the Q&A. I don't mind staying here if anybody has got any further questions. What I have also done is I have shared the link to Rob's handout. I'll do it again now, so at least everybody does have that. He says he'll do it again now. I think I've just managed to to delete it out of here. No, I'm going to share this now to everybody, so at least everybody can see it. And that is the handout from today. So if anybody would like to come off of mute or ask any further questions, then please feel free to do so. If not, I will go into the rest of the stuff that I need to do. In actual fact, I can do that bit anyway, whilst people are thinking if they do have any questions. But I think that's it was a really good snapshot today, Rob, in terms of some things that you know that you certainly found and been able to share with us. And I think there's some really useful stuff there and things that people can take away from this. As I said, Rob's handout is there.
So note, if I can just on that handout, it's got all the slides that you've just seen in there, but it's also got one or two bullet points about each one. So you know, you can compare that with your own notes and add to them. But it's also I've left space in sections underneath them for you to go away and start making some notes for yourself. Some of the questions on there are the ones I may have asked on the webinar today. Others are ones that I haven't asked, but I think are really important for you to go away and start thinking about. So please go for it, print it off, fill it out, whatever works for you. And also feel free to share it with your teams and ask them the same questions.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Rob. I've just shared the screen here with regards to where the recordings can be found. Typically, we will get these out on the Facebook page. They'll go out on Twitter. They'll go out on the LinkedIn groups. We'll also send it out on the Sunday mailer as well. I will also share a copy of the slides to that as well. Now, we can be contacted on any of these means. There's the YouTube page there as well, of which all of our videos will end up going to. As mentioned earlier on, you can get to us on any of these means. Do feedback to us on this event. Do also feedback you know, on anything that we have done or we are doing, and also as mentioned, if you want to become a committee member or you'd like to help us, then we're always very happy to have you on board. Also, just to mention that the next event, as mentioned earlier, we've got 2 left. So next Wednesday morning, we have a lady called Penny Ferguson, from the Living Leader, coming to join us with Kirsty Keck, who is the Leadership and Capability Lead at Nationwide Building Society. I'm also going to feature in that interview as well. But this is actually going to be more in the interview style around Living Leader, and it's an interesting one. You know, talking around management versus and also there with leadership as well. Very interesting. So that's our next Wednesday morning. The following Thursday, the 10th of December, at 9:30, we've got a presentation around peeking around the corner. That's a strategy review during pandemic, or during a strategy review during a pandemic through scenario planning. And this is Andrea Moffat, who will be coming to talk to us around the VUCA model. I've also got to speak to you around the COVID-19 hub, as well as all the other things on the CIPD website. You know, if you are going to stay on, then absolutely great. I can see that there are some questions that have come through the chat window, or some comments anyway. Adam
Pickford has a question if he wants to come off mute.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you. Yeah, no, I was just waiting for the opportune moment. I always think it's nice to do some verbal interaction on these. So firstly, Rob, thank you very much indeed. Really good, thought-provoking session. You know, my question, I think, is really about the precision of language. You know, so my experience of interacting with, you know, commercial and business leaders is quite often there's a misunderstanding of some of the language that we use in L&D. You know, and clearly there's an implication for the way in which we adapt our language to to help it resonate with them. But I just wondered whether there's any particular nuggets or experiences that you would share with us as a group about how you make sure that your interpretation of some of this language lands in a way that business leaders both understand, but also understand it in the same way in which you intend it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the thing that comes to mind, I mentioned performance consultancy earlier on. Now, aside from, I'm a massive advocate of natural language and not corporate language. There's less huge words that we all use when we're at home. I mean, I pinch myself and I call out other people. If I wouldn't say it at home, why am I saying it in work? That's one of those things. But one of the questions I love to ask at the start of any sort of engagement is, if you had, and this is to a stakeholder or leader, if you had no L&D team, there were no trainers, no designers, no nothing, how would you help your people achieve what you're asking for? And the nugget for that, for me, is that they start to use their language to explain learning and development and coaching and performance and potential in the workplace. And it's amazing what ideas they start coming up with. And then you can absolutely latch on that, and there's your translation book right there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. No, that's really good advice. Thank you very much.
That's the question.
Doesn't seem to be any more in there at the moment, but if anybody else would like to come off of mute or has a question they'd like to submit through the chat window, Rob is more than happy to answer these.
Absolutely.
Rob, we've had some great feedback written in the chat window today in terms of some great food for thought, great session in terms of actually getting the L&D team to to think about a move away from transactional to transformative.
Hey Rob, I had a question. This is Jeff Hummel. I was wondering if you've ever given the same type of presentation to a broader group of leaders, not so functionally specific as L&D, and talking about basically how they can make a difference in terms of looking at their energy, fulfillment, legacy. Have you ever shaped this same kind of presentation to a different audience?
Yeah, I mean, it, like you say, quite rightly, Jeff, it's shaped slightly differently. I mean, normally a lot of one-on-one work I do with first of all, L&D leaders really gets them to start thinking about, actually, I don't really enjoy what I do the way that I'm currently doing it. But equally with operational leaders, and particularly first line leaders, I love to do this with, because what I've actually found is when speaking to some of the newer leaders, first line leaders, is that they're actually wanting to lead in a different way. And it's actually the kind of traditional status quo actions and culture in the organizations that's stopping them from doing so. So their reaction tends to be really, really good. And what tends to get in the way of it, if I'm completely honest, the big objection, which is why this is the start of a journey, it's not an overnight change, is that they're so entrenched in the results and the bonuses and the targets of, certainly in the bigger organizations, of how it works. It tends to be, I love it, I'd love to be able to work in this way, I just haven't got a clue how we can start to do that, because if we did, we'd lose money overnight, or we'd lose people overnight, whatever it might be. But the number one objective tends to be time. I don't have the time to work in this way. But the management framework that I put together actually kind of clearly articulates it, that this isn't about spending more time doing things. It's actually about releasing time. The amount of time we take in managing these things will be reduced, so we can actually spend more time on our people rather than the results. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, it's great. No, I mean, I'm often trying to get people to see possibilities, a way to channel their energies, not feel like they have to steer the aircraft carrier, and that they actually have an ability to make things happen on their own. And I think too many people stop before they get started because they're daunted. So I could see that presentation working very well in the way you've described it. So it's great. Thank you.
I think it's really important. I think those questions are just, why do we do what we do? And ask that of leaders, senior, junior, middle managers, wherever it is. Why are we in the business that we're in? What are we trying to achieve? And and people did not get involved in those to do PDPs and PIPs and performance reviews and whatever it might be. Generally, people want to be leaders. If it wasn't just for them, they didn't want to be it because they want to lead people and make a difference and for their clients, customers, but also develop their team. So what can we do to actually bring that to life for them?
Great stuff. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Anybody else would like to come off of mute to ask a question at all or put something into the chat window? I think, Rob, we may have actually have finished there. So so once again, thank you ever so much for coming to present this to us today. I think there's, as I said earlier on, there's some great thought-provoking stuff there, and there's certainly been plenty of interaction in the chat window today. So yeah, so once again, thank you ever so much for doing that. As mentioned, folks, the slides are in the chat panel. I'll also get those out on the social media websites and out onto the mailer this week. And we will hopefully look forward. We'll definitely look forward to seeing you all at another event. As I said, the next one will be next week. So on that note, I'm going to be stop the recording shortly. If any of you would like to stay on, we will be here for a little while. And we look forward to catching up with you again very, very soon. So on that note, stay safe and speak to you all soon. Thank you.